Hey everyone, Ewan from WhatCulture here, back on the gaming channel to potentially take the piss, I admit, but hey, the X-Men are back in a big way, and I sniffed a good excuse to talk about a couple of my favourite, if not forgotten, comic book video games. Sue me. Somehow it's 2019 and Marvel Ultimate Alliance is back. It makes no sense, but the gaming franchise that endeared itself to true believers in the late noughties has returned, debuting to a moderately positive response in July. It's developed by Team Ninja and is also a Nintendo Switch exclusive, and while it does bear all the hallmarks of its two predecessors, it isn't quite the same thing, stumbling in a similar fashion to the Vicarious Visions fronted Ultimate Alliance 2, which was seen as a step down compared to the original 2006 title developed by Raven Software. In many ways, Ultimate Alliance should be seen as Raven's series. They built the first game themselves, and it was also they who developed X-Men Legends, Ultimate Alliance's spiritual predecessor, and a series all too many fans seem to overlook, either due to the declining popularity of the X-Men during the rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or simply because Ultimate Alliance is seen as the bigger, better, and more ambitious title. Releasing in 2004 and 2005 respectively, X-Men Legends and its sequel were isometric co-op-oriented dungeon crawlers that focused on Marvel's eponymous Uncanny group, arriving at a time when, in the wake of the 90s TV show and then Fox's movies, the X-Men were still the House of Ideas' most beloved and famous superhero team. That seems almost strange to think in the age of the MCU and the Avengers, but it's true. To many, the X-Men were and still are Marvel's most important superhero property. So, why now? Why X-Men Legends? Well, apart from the fact that Ultimate Alliance has sparked new interest in the series, the X-Men themselves are also on the up. Teased for MCU Phase 5 and on the cusp of a new golden era with the arrival of writer Jonathan Hickman, Marvel's mutants have embarked on their own little resurgence, and so it feels only out to talk about one of their more successful, if not forgotten, exploits in the gaming medium. Once again, I'm Ewan, this is WhatCulture Gaming, and here's the best X-Men games no one played. So, picture this. It's 2004. Fox Kids still rules the airwaves, Tony Blair's Prime Minister, America is chowing down on freedom fries, and the X-Men are everywhere. Not content with reruns of the formidable 90s cartoon, Marvel also air another series called X-Men Evolution. Fox have back-to-back successes at the box office with X-Men and X2, and Joss Whedon is in the midst of his own comic series based on the team, dubbed Astonishing X-Men. I kind of prefer Grant Morrison's new X-Men, but hey, it's still really good. In short, the X-Men craze was still going strong and was long into its second decade as Marvel's most bankable property. Unfortunately, it was also a period marred by uninspiring tie-in video games. Now, the X-Men were more fortunate than most in that they had actually featured in several great titles by this point in time, including the iconic 90s arcade game, Marvel vs. Capcom, and later X2 Wolverine's Revenge, a tie-in for the film that boasted a completely original story written by legendary comics writer Larry Hama. Also, Mark Hamill voiced Wolverine. How cool was that? Be that as it may, genuinely great comic book video games were few and far between, with Spider-Man 2 the only one to really show the potential comic book properties had in the gaming medium. The X-Men, comparatively, were yet to find that same kind of title. Today's Raven Software is sadly no longer the studio it once was. Go and check out mine and Josh's 10 beloved studios publishers ruins for more on that, but back in the early noughties, they were on the up. Raven led development on the seminal Jedi Knight games for LucasArts and quickly carved out a niche as a studio capable of adapting licenses into good, if not great, video games. The X-Men were next on the agenda, and the end result ended up being so much more than just a decent dungeon crawler. It became a fantastic introduction to Marvel Comics. The first X-Men title in Raven's series arrived in 2004, a year after X2 and X-Men Evolution's final episode. Marvel's mutants continued to rule the airwaves, however, and Legends was poised to fill the gap perfectly between the franchise's bigger outings. Turns out it'd also do a whole lot more than that though, with Raven using the game as an excuse to dive deep into the comics mythology and provide a comprehensive education in the process. I encountered Legends at the same time I was starting to get into comics more seriously, or as seriously as you can when you're an 8-year-old living in the UK. They were huge and boasted an appeal most other properties didn't, and yet the X-Men still proved to be elusive, boasting a scarily detailed continuity that can prove off-putting to even the most seasoned comic book fans. Fortunately, the game bore that in mind when it came to its story, setting itself in a world inspired by the comics that included a complete look into their entire history, and one portrayed from the perspective of a new student. Magma, voiced by Cree Summer, better known to animation fans as the original Penny from Inspector Gadget, is that student. Players explore the X-Mansion from her perspective and are thus able to conduct conversations with various X-Men who can then basically dump exposition in an organic way. It feels more natural that way, and as Magma grows more familiar with the X-Men, so too does the player. It's such a clever touch, and Legends' many nods to the comics certainly helps. Players can bide their time trying out trivia, playing flashback missions, and talking to other X-Men in the mansion. Factor in the huge roster of playable and non-playable characters, and it's fair to say that you could do a lot worse as far as introductions are concerned. Most adaptations of comic book source material can never really delve in as deep as they want to with a given property, but both Legends games worked as enjoyable RPGs and as a resource for fans to really explore the nooks and crannies of the X-Men's world. The stories touched upon classic arcs involving seminal heroes and villains from Marvel's library, while trivia games and different flashback stories fleshed out their decades-long history in an engaging way. Comic book games never really dove this deep with their exposition, but Legends made it enjoyable and accessible, something no one ever really tends to dwell on. Which brings us potentially to the best thing about X-Men Legends, the co-op. Shared screen co-op was one of life's simple pleasures during the 6th generation of consoles. It's never really a thing these days, while co-op on the whole has dropped off a cliff in the wake of multiplayer-focused titles. It's partially why fans are so ecstatic to see that Ultimate Alliance was making a comeback, and while the old title's gameplay isn't quite as enjoyable as their more modern counterparts, they more than did the job. Rehashed animations and movesets were commonplace, but for the most part, Raven managed to make each character feel unique when compared to their colleagues. This was taken up a whole new notch in the sequel, which featured the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants working together to take down Apocalypse, meaning players could assemble a team comprised of both factions if they so desired. Both Legends titles were effectively Diablo-esque dungeon crawlers. Players assembled a party comprised of 4 mutants and were able to customize them, switch them up on the fly, and lead them into various missions. There was a reason to try out every character, and while the game always tended to reward you more if you stuck with a particular setup, as is the nature of most RPGs, it never got boring trying out new heroes whenever possible. Now, one of the biggest criticisms leveled at Legends when it first released was that combat could get repetitive, and to a degree, yeah, that's probably correct. Players unlock more power moves as both games progress, but every character has the same basic moveset of hand-to-hand attacks. Tank-style characters play similarly, while the usual mix of brawlers, healers, and ranged characters all possess overlapping skill sets. Bizarrely, though, it never really feels like an issue. Because each character is visually distinct and has enough unique powers and skills to seem different, it's easy to forgive the occasional overlap. Although the in-game graphics in both X-Men Legends titles were nothing to write home about, they were more than serviceable coming towards the end of the 6th gen. Sure, there was the familiar dank and grimy dungeon synonymous with the genre, but Raven had another thing up their sleeve, a trick they'd utilized again for the release of Marvel Ultimate Alliance. It's fair to say that the storylines for all of Raven's X-Men titles were never particularly impressive, but they got the job done. They were basically a vehicle to get players from one exotic Marvel locale to the next, while the story itself was told via in-game briefings and dialogue, and also the occasional CGI cutscene. The CG sequences in the Legends series were handled by Blur Studio. Blur are famous for bringing some truly spectacular CG visuals to the gaming medium, adding some much-needed flair and making various titles feel just a little bit more blockbuster than they probably were. In the years since they worked on X-Men, Blur have taken their talents to the big screen, creating the famous leaked Deadpool test footage that convinced Fox to go through with the project, while also providing impressive CG trailers for Rocksteady's Arkham titles away from Marvel. Although Legends came around relatively early in Blur's career, the same year they won an Academy Award for Go for Broke, their talents were in full effect. While Fox's movies were busy doing their best to avoid the bright and colourful costumes of the X-Men's comics, Blur and Raven embraced them fully. Figures look like they're leaping off the page in the studio's CG cutscenes, while stunning pieces of concept art help you forget all about the loading times in between levels. Now, the zinger. Marvel Ultimate Alliance is a beloved title that brought the entire Marvel universe to players' fingertips in 2006, and it was brilliant. A new generation of consoles necessitated an upgrade across the board, with players now able to assemble their own team spanning Marvel's entire library. Want to recreate the Fantastic Four? You can do that. Want to create your own eclectic mix of do-gooders? You can do that too. Only in this particular instance, is it possible that less may have actually been more? Look, this isn't to say that Marvel Ultimate Alliance isn't great. Of course it is. Rather that the focus on the X-Men and X-Men Legends meant that no particular character ever felt shortchanged. All sort of got their chance to shine, whereas there were huge swaths of the roster in both Ultimate Alliance games that didn't really get to have their own set piece or even a compelling reason to be there in the first place. Look, I love Daredevil as much as the next guy, but what the hell is he gonna do against a cosmically powered Doctor Doom? Nothing. With the X-Men, it's sort of easier to justify the odd omission. The team's rotating all the time in the comics, and in streamlining the experience to hone in on one Marvel property, it could be argued that Legends is just a smidge more detailed than its successors. One can only imagine what a third Legends game would have looked like, but one would hope with the renewed attention that Ultimate Alliance has received with the release of the third game, that a new one could potentially be on the horizon. Maybe in 2019, with the X-Men making a huge comeback, it might not be as distant a prospect as was once thought. Hopefully. And that was my little look back at X-Men Legends. I hope you enjoyed the video, but before you go, I want to talk to you for just a second about WhatCulture Comics. You can probably gather based off the amount of times I mentioned Batman or insert superhero franchise here on each week's Chatty Faces that comics are kind of my obsession. And if you fancy hearing me blather on about them more, you should definitely give WhatCulture's comics channel a try. You can find lists by me and mostly me, but Josh and Jules occasionally stop on by as well. We do news, podcasts, and editorials like this every month, and it would mean the world if you could give it a shot after watching this. Either way, I've been Ewan. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to WhatCulture Gaming if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!